Bernie Madoff's lies exposed.
He was our friend for many years.
The shocking truth behind the scandal. It was the biggest financial fraud in history. $65 billion. Gone without a trace. The mastermind? A man who seemed untouchable. This is the story of how Bernie Madoff fooled the world. White-collar criminals don't steal with guns. They steal with trust. Unlike small-time crooks, looking for a quick payday, they play the long game, using psychology, persuasion, and charm to amass fortunes beyond belief. And today, we live in a world where image is everything, making it the perfect playground for con artists. These imposters don't just want money, they want control. They want to be admired, untouchable. For them, the thrill of the game matters more than the prize itself. So, is money really what drives swindlers? Or is it something much deeper? Madoff's rise in the financial industry. By the 1970s, Bernie Madoff had already positioned himself as a rising star on Wall Street. While many traders relied on traditional paper-based stock trading, Madoff saw the future. Computers. At a time when most firms still executed trades manually, his company was among the first to embrace electronic trading systems. This gave him an edge. He could execute trades faster and more efficiently than competitors. But Madoff wasn't just another Wall Street trader. He was an innovator. He played a critical role in the formation of NASDAQ, National Association of Securities Dealers Automated Quotations, the world's first electronic stock exchange. It was a radical shift, away from the old system of shouting brokers and handwritten orders, and it changed everything. In 1971, NASDAQ was officially launched, offering an alternative to the New York Stock Exchange. It was designed to be faster, more efficient, and more accessible to smaller firms. Madoff was one of its earliest supporters and played a key role in shaping its operations. He recognized that electronic trading was the future, and he leveraged it to build his firm into a powerhouse. By the 1980s, Madoff's company had grown beyond just a small trading operation. It became one of the largest market makers in the industry. So, what exactly is a market maker? Think of them as the behind-the-scenes facilitators of smooth stock trading. A market maker is a firm that facilitates stock trading by buying and selling securities to ensure smooth transactions. Instead of waiting for buyers and sellers to find each other, market makers step in, reducing delays and keeping the market liquid. Madoff's firm excelled at this. He processed trades for some of the biggest retail brokers and investment firms in the country. His company became a go-to partner for executing large trades efficiently. Because his firm was so deeply embedded in the financial system, it meant that thousands of transactions worth billions of dollars flowed through Madoff's operation every day. By the 1990s, Madoff wasn't just an important player in finance, he was a leader. His firm was seen as a model of efficiency, reliability, and stability. It had top-tier technology, a prestigious client list, and a reputation for delivering results. That reputation earned him an even bigger role at NASDAQ. In 1990, Madoff became vice chairman of NASDAQ, further solidifying his influence. Unlike many traders who sought attention, Madoff maintained an image of calm professionalism. He wasn't flashy. He didn't make reckless bets. He presented himself as a careful, conservative investor who valued trust above all else. And people believed him. His firm's ability to handle high-profile clients with discretion gave it an air of exclusivity. Investors saw it as a privilege to have access to Madoff's expertise. Many believed that Madoff's success came from his deep industry connections, superior technology, and strategic insight. Few questioned whether there was more to the story, but there was more to the story. Behind the polished image and Wall Street accolades, something far more sinister was brewing, something that would shake the entire financial world to its core. Than the typical con. It wasn't just about fake numbers. It was about psychology. Rather than relying solely on fabricated data, Madoff played a more subtle game. Here's how he lured the world's wealthiest individuals and institutions. Madoff knew that the easiest people to scam were those who already trusted him. So instead of targeting random investors, he went after communities that shared deep social bonds. The Jewish community, where he was a respected philanthropist, country clubs, and elite financial circles, where word of mouth spread his reputation. Even charitable foundations saw him as a safe and reliable steward of their funds. His victims didn't just invest because of his returns. They invested because of his connections. Madoff's biggest advantage? He wasn't working alone. Instead of dealing with individual investors, he used hedge funds and financial intermediaries to funnel billions into his scheme. These feeder funds, run by prestigious firms, unknowingly legitimized Madoff's fraud. If a respected hedge fund trusted him, why would anyone question it? Madoff didn't ask for money. He turned people away. When someone expressed interest in investing, he would politely refuse, only to later allow select individuals in. This made his fund seem like an elite, invitation-only opportunity. Potential investors weren't just eager to give him their money. They felt privileged to do so. Every month, Madoff's investors received official-looking statements showing steady, impressive profits. The only problem? None of it was real. His firm never actually traded securities, but the fake reports made it seem like they did. Bogus stock purchases, perfectly timed options trades, consistent, market-defying profits. It all looked legitimate, so no one questioned it. For years, Madoff's scheme ran without a hitch. Investors believed they were making steady profits, and withdrawals were processed without delay. But there was one simple truth. Madoff's profits existed only on paper. The moment too many investors tried to cash out at once, the entire empire would crumble. And in 2008, that's exactly what happened. Actually invested those billions. It was all smoke and mirrors. And now, for the first time, he couldn't cover the withdrawals. On December 10th, 2008, Bernie Madoff admitted to his two sons that his entire investment business was a lie. His sons alerted the federal authorities about his fraud. New York, December 11th, 2008. The FBI enters the penthouse of one of the world's most highly respected financiers. Bernie Madoff, once celebrated as a financial genius, now stood accused of running the biggest Ponzi scheme in history. His arrest made headlines worldwide. News stations rushed to cover the story. But the most shocking part wasn't just the scale of the fraud. It was the fact that, even as the financial system crumbled, Madoff's victims still believed their money was safe. Madoff wouldn't scam us, so they say. Even as banks failed and financial institutions crumbled, Madoff's clients insisted, "Bernie has our money. We'll get it back. He's too smart to lose." They had no idea their life savings were already gone. Throughout history, financial scams have come and gone. But Madoff's Ponzi scheme was different. It wasn't run by an unknown fraudster. It didn't target reckless gamblers. It wasn't built on greed. It was built on trust. Madoff wasn't born into Wall Street privilege, unlike the typical finance elite, who came from wealthy families and attended Ivy League schools. Madoff carved his path. He built his reputation. He earned people's trust. And then, he used it against them. Harvard professor Eugene Soltes, who spent years studying white-collar criminals, noted something unique about Madoff's crime. Unlike many fraudsters, Madoff knew his victims personally. These were family. These were friends, members of his community. And yet, he stole from them, without hesitation. Helicopters circled above the courthouse before the hearing, and federal officers with automatic weapons stood outside as Madoff arrived. Investors signed in before entering the 24th floor courtroom. Stripped of power, fortune, and reputation. On April 14th, 2021, at the age of 82, Bernard Madoff died in prison from chronic kidney disease. There was no grand farewell, no mourning crowds, just the quiet end of a man who had once deceived the world.
Madoff has gone to meet his maker, but we have not heard the last of him. Like Charles Ponzi before him, his name has already become part of the financial lexicon, shorthand for how financiers can exploit human nature for profit. Ponzi, with a plan involving airmail stamps, gave his name to investment plans that pay old investors with money they take in from new investors, and do not make the underlying investments that they claim. Sadly, there have been plenty more such schemes since Ponzi died in 1949, many of which came to light like Madoff's in the wake of the financial crisis of 2008. But Madoff took the Ponzi concept to extremes nobody had previously thought possible. The news that he had been arrested and charged with running a Ponzi scheme then estimated to be worth $65 billion was one of the greatest of all the shocks of 2008. Across the world of finance the reaction was the same when the news hit screens. How is this even possible? More than a decade later, we can begin to see the secrets of Madoff's success. As he departs, we should all understand the key principles that allowed him to get away with what he did for so long. He was disciplined. The scheme was internally consistent, records were kept, clients received fictitious statements on a regular basis, and those who wanted to withdraw cash received it promptly. Close examination of those statements might have raised concerns, but he also worked out how not to raise such alarm. Consistency was his distinction, rather than anything spectacular. Everyone knows the cliché that if something looks too good to be true, it probably is. Judged in its totality, Madoff's investment record was far too good to be true. But no one year ever looked that great. He simply continued compounding his gains at a rate of 10% or thereabouts, year after year. He never claimed to do better, even if the market was up 20%. It was only after he had been operating for many years that statisticians could call foul. His very consistency eventually became statistically impossible to believe, but each individual year, in itself, was perfectly plausible. He understood that conservative people can be conned by the right kind of trickster, and not just the greedy hoping to make a fast buck. Madoff's victims weren't in many cases wildly greedy, or starstruck by some improbable way to make money in a hurry. They saw investing with Madoff as a trustworthy and conservative way to ensure that their savings would gain steadily. Exclusivity will help you sell anything to anyone. Madoff did not advertise his scheme. And he had a well-practiced shtick of telling friends who asked if they could buy into his funds that they were full and that there was nothing he could do for them, only to relent and say that he could find a way in for them. In such circumstances, people feel privileged to be allowed in and perceive something special in what they are buying. It is almost a virtue that your fund is not regulated and lacks transparency. A decade later, alternative assets such as hedge funds and private equity continue to benefit from this. You don't even need a great story to persuade people to invest with you. On the rare occasions that Madoff talked about his investing strategy in public, he was almost comically imprecise. Replicating his results was impossible, but as he hadn't told people enough to try to replicate them, he could avoid detection. Utter ruthlessness and a sociopathic lack of any concern for others make crime much easier. Madoff deliberately targeted charities and his own religious groups. He stole from his friends. A practicing Orthodox Jew, he stole from his fellow congregants and ransacked the endowment of Yeshiva University, one of the central institutions of the U.S. Orthodox community, where he was the chairman of the board of trustees. One of his own sons was driven to suicide. Cynicism on such a scale is hard for most of us to imagine. In a version of Joseph Goebbels' Big Lie, the more he became involved as a philanthropist, the harder it became to believe that he was stealing from those philanthropies. A position in the establishment is great cover. Madoff ran a brokerage, and rose to be chairman of NASDAQ. Beyond these points, many red flags should have been obvious at the time. His numbers were audited by an accounting firm with only 3 employees. Several whistleblowers pointed out that his numbers were too good to be true, but assumed that he was engaged in insider trading, front-running or money laundering, rather than making up his numbers out of thin air. Gossip that he was up to something was widespread on Wall Street. Several banks wouldn't touch him. Journalists were sniffing around, and Barron's, one of the most influential voices on Wall Street, had run a piece questioning his numbers as early as 2001. But Madoff's scheme was so well conceived and organized that he carried on as ever. Regulatory changes in the wake of Madoff have been minimal. And so perhaps the most sobering thought as he leaves is that without the once-in-a-century crisis of 2008 he might well have died without ever being detected.